Okay, cool. All right, there we go. So welcome everyone, and it's funny, that conversation that just took place with Grant. I'm going to preface this by saying I love the learning labs because I always walk away either learning something or being reminded of something. So maybe there's no new learning, but it is a lab. So we're going to have a little experiment today, throw some things together, and hopefully it won't explode. Some difficult conversations or maybe some easy conversations. I don't consider myself a pro, the end all be all. We're all learning and growing, and this is an opportunity for all of us to throw our like we always do in all of our learning labs here in the network, share our experience and our views and our perspectives. So this is just a deeper dive into diversity, equity, and inclusion. We didn't touch on equity when we reviewed our new chapter in leadership, but I'd like to include that this time around. And I have the benefit, I'm going to say, of working in a smaller work group. And now you have all the small little boxes on the screen since I'm sharing, but I did see that Cleveland is here and Grant is here. And I'm just looking around. I see Bill is also here. So we're working on a smaller work group with our leadership chapter and have really done some more conversations along with Tracy is in our group. So I really thank them all for being here and all of you for being here today in this conversation that we'll have. So let's dive in. So let's start by just going around the room and how do we define diversity, inclusion, and equity? How would you define diversity first? What's diversity?
So,
well, I guess I'll wade in and say the diversity in an organization really means to me difference in viewpoints, styles, backgrounds, ethnic groups, racial mixes, different cultures coming together. Can it ever be perfect? Well, it takes a very, very large population to do that. But if for those of us who've worked around a lot and you sort of look at the opposite of diversity, we see that a lot. You know, a bunch of old white guys, so that sort of thing. So what does it mean? It means getting people who can contribute their best to the organization and giving them an opportunity to be part of the group, inclusion, and be treated in a fair and equal way. Equity. Yeah.
my definition
Okay.
is a little shorter, but it's
Oh.
finding value through the unique abilities of people who are different.
Yes. Nancy?
I sort of have an additional observation regarding diversity, but let me preface it with a question. I've been sort of researching to see how I could use this within my practice. And so I have been looking for people who've recently been named an executive in an organization responsible for this program. And I'm starting to recognize that many of them are challenged with the fact that they have implemented a diversity and inclusion program, but oftentimes it was something, as they refer it to, mere checking the boxes. Okay, we've identified race, we've identified gender, we've identified, income group, things like that. And so the question becomes, how do we make that even more? Is it of value simply checking the boxes and putting numbers to these factors? And then I came across a really great article in the past week, and it was dealing with those people who are physically and mentally challenged. It was about UPS hired a young man, and his entire dream was to become a UPS driver, and he has Down syndrome, and he worked, graduated from college, got to this point, and they recognize that. So how do we broaden the definition of diversity and not keep putting things in boxes?
Great. Thank you, Nancy. And I'm going to have a follow-up question that you brought to mind that I wrote down for later. Someone else was chiming in?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think of diversity as any organization should be a reflection of this country. When I sit and look at this screen, I see diversity. And so whenever I think of diversity, that's what I think of. And then equity and inclusion, you're a part, you have a voice. And regardless of where you come from, your background, whatever race, whatever designator you want to put on, everyone is starting from the same place. So you've made it equitable for everyone involved.
Great. Thank you, Cleveland.
Bertha, I just came on board because I had to get the passcode. What were you asking people to contribute or to bring about?
Sure. Hi, Arnie.
Hi,
It's
Bertha.
diversity, equity, and inclusion.
So what was your, I know what the theme is of today of your presentation. My question is, what were you asking that people are answering?
Yes, defining equity, diversity, and inclusion. What's the
Okay.
definition?
May I offer something?
Absolutely.
It is a competitive advantage. And the only way people are going to get on board, often people want to do the right thing, and that's wonderful, but it is a competitive advantage. And that's what I think people have to understand.
All right. Great. Thank you, Arnie. Anyone else?
It's attitudinal. Whatever definition you want to put around it, whatever mechanical words you want to put around it, it's not transactional, it's attitudinal. You know, whether you're talking about diversity, equity, or inclusion, and that therein lies the reason why most programs don't work.
Let's talk more about that. That's great, Rick. So going back to Nancy's checking the boxes, it being attitudinal. So where does it start?
Well, I mean, it's it starts with the thing that we have always espoused in the network, that our beliefs belie our attitudes belie our behavior, and our behavior is what drives results. You want different results, you gotta do different. You want to do different, you got to think different. So as I've applied this new chapter to some of the workshops and coaching that I do, I've started asking the question, what events from your past underpin the way you think today? And I don't ask them to share the answer. I ask them, was this easy or difficult to do? So far, we're about 99% difficult. So yeah, it's a difficult process to dive into your past and understand the way you think about gender, race, physical ability, sexual orientation, whatever the case may be.
Thanks for that.
What's coming up for me is, as you speak, Rick, and maybe this is further down the road, Bertha, is what roles the systemic racism that we all live in deal with, play in developing those beliefs and attitudes.
Can I just ask a favor? When someone starts talking, would they sort of introduce themselves? Because I'm looking at all you guys on the screen, and like when Rick was talking, it took me a while to figure out his mouth was moving. So if we could do that, I'd appreciate it.
Hi, that was Lauren.
Yeah, I figured you, Lauren. There weren't too many of us on, but when Rick was talking, I'm thinking.
There's a yellow box around the speaker, by the way, at least on my screen.
Okay. Well, my screen's small, so it takes me a while to find it. So if it's not a problem, if people just say this is so-and-so, I would appreciate it.
Nancy, this is Bill Kelly. If you click in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, the box that says view, it gives you the option to go speaker view, gallery view, or full screen. If you go to speaker view, you'll get a large shot of who is talking or who's coughing or whose dog is barking, but whatever. If they're off mute, then you'll see them and their name will then be in the bottom left-hand corner.
Great, thanks. Okay, any other definitions? What have we missed? Diversity, equity, and inclusion? Or have we covered it? Okay. So if we look at this, and some of you have mentioned this in your definition. What do you think here when you look at these pictures? Equality versus equity. What does it bring to mind? Does it bring something to mind?
Hi, this is Janice.
Hi, Janice.
Hi. This picture to me brings up just systematic inequality, just because you can see that there are some blockages with equality versus those barriers being removed when you look at equality.
Yes. So
Yeah.
go ahead.
I'm sorry, this is Bob Fritz. The more I look at this picture, the more I get it. The equity part of it is really that group of three are sharing the assets they have in a way. So the tall gentleman on the left gave up his box so the shorter girl in the middle could see, and somehow they fashioned a ramp so that everyone could have, equality and equity. They're hard. I was about to say that they all have an equal opportunity to view, which sounds like equality, but it's equity because it's dispersing the assets so that everyone can play a role.
Great. Yes, Bob. So that there's access. So like you said, the gentleman, the tall gentleman in the red is allowing those to be able to see some of what he can see based on giving them access. And not everyone shows up at the table with the same tools, with the same history, with the same experience. So that's just giving someone the access and the equity. Yeah.
As opposed to something else like the corporation or some other entity giving it. It's a shared responsibility that creates a sense of unity there.
Great. I'm going to segue now, Bob, because of what you just said, to a question that came up earlier when someone mentioned it. And I said, who should be in our organizations? Who should be in charge? Who should be that diversity and inclusion POC chair?
That probably varies.
It should be the person at the top of the org chart.
Yes, without question. Rick is absolutely right. That's the only person that he can delegate other things, but he can't delegate that.
Right. And I would only add, I agree with that. It starts at the very top, but then someone else mentioned it earlier. I don't know if it was Rick or who it was, but then it's a shared, because if he delegates it down, everyone has to take ownership.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because you don't eliminate racism or sexism with programs.
Right.
And if he doesn't delegate it, he's not responsible.
Absolutely.
And therefore it folds into culture of the organization. It's an integral part of culture.
And one of the things I'm noticing as I've been researching people, as I said, who've been recently named to executive positions, with one of their responsibilities being to either expand on their current diversity and inclusion programs or implement them. And just so far, I've identified 9 people in the Baltimore, Washington area. And the interesting thing about, if you will, their job descriptions, this activity in all these organizations involve them developing and leading this as a team effort.
Thank you, Nancy. Anyone else? Anyone else think that it should be someone else other than from the top?
Well, I think, going back to the attitude question, the thing that always disturbs me about the organization structure is that this is not a program. You can't put in a program and have equity and inclusion and diversity. And but just sort of branching out a bit, a slightly different topic on the question of equity. To me, this has been the most difficult element of the 3 to sort of get a good, clean definition of. If we're running an organization, how do we know that we have equity across all? Because the lack of equity is in so many nooks and crannies of behavior, culture, attitudes, ground rules of the organization and whatever. And how do you identify those? And you can only identify them if you have everyone in the organization helping to identify them, and have the people address how to make it right.
Yeah, you raise a
To
good.
that point, Grant, I have some recent experience with this in my town. And to your question, Bertha, about is it only the person at the top? We've put together a diversity, racial equity, and inclusion committee. And while the sponsorship of that and the charge for putting it together came from the top and the support is from the top, we're actually at the top kind of keeping our hands out of it, because our philosophy is, with respect to this particular area and what we're trying to address, we don't know what we don't know. And so the charter and the support, like I said, came from the top, but the implementation is coming from a working group that we're interacting with and giving us support.
Okay.
I think part of the challenge is that you have, especially in larger organizations, you have rules that are written around, and I'm talking about HR rules that are written around equality, right? Because you're in compliance mode, and let's face it, a lot of HR organizations are there to make sure to prevent lawsuits, to prevent litigation, if you will. And so you have a situation where the rules themselves are creating the very problem that they think they're trying to solve.
Absolutely. So then what could be a possible, what's the opportunity there for organizations today?
Well, you got to relook at your measurements, because that's why they do it. They're doing it because you're trying to have a set of metrics that is equal for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and I had this situation back in my corporate career, first time I let somebody work remotely, everybody else said, well, why can't I work remotely? And so they were in this equal mode, and I was thinking equity, trying to give everybody a fair shot at participating and being part of the team. But the conditions were going to be different depending on each person's set of circumstances. And it raised a little bit of a stink, because I was looking at it through the lens of equity, but everybody else was looking at it through the lens of equality. So you have to get past the fact that we have to measure everybody the same way, right? So you measure output, you don't measure input. Forget input, because this is all about trying to measure input. The 4 equal boxes is input. The equity is output. Measure the results, and don't get hung up on whether it was all achieved the same way.
Great.
And I'm just very concerned that the equity balance is hidden in a lot of ground rules and things that we can't really easily identify, as Rick has said. We had a meeting. I'm head of the policy committee and chair of the policy committee for the Chamber of Commerce here. We met with the Minority Business Alliance. And so people are running into barriers, obstacles, when they're trying to get their business, either buying property or starting a business or whatever, and they run into things. And if it's just an attitudinal thing, or I didn't like you because you're a minority business owner, that's one thing. And yeah, you have to identify that and try to change the attitudes. But lots of times they're just ground rules, laws, rules that prevent certain people from participating. They may be racist or they may not, but we've got to, we're working to try to find a way to identify those things specifically. And so if someone says to us, I couldn't get this done by comparison with my white counterpart, it took me 3 months and it took them 3 days, then what was it? We need to find out exactly what those things are and to find a way to change them.
I find the word compliance to be very interesting when we talk about this subject, because compliance to me implies adjusting behavior. And I don't know how you apply compliance to adjusting attitude.
Yeah.
You know, in Springfield, Massachusetts, where I was very involved in the community, we did some stuff with some gateway cities, and we sent a contingent to Grand Rapids, Michigan. And Grand Rapids came up with a concept called the Racism Institute. And they brought that back to Springfield, and I went to it. And it was horrifying to me that here I thought that I had an understanding of this, and to listen to people of color tell the stories of walking down a sidewalk and having somebody seeing them there and crossing to get to the other side of the street, or being pulled over in neighborhoods and being asked, why are you in this neighborhood? And then we did this exercise, and this was a very diverse group where you stood at the back of the room and we're on a tile floor with squares, and they would ask a series of questions. And you would step forward if your answer to the question. And when they were done asking the 30 questions or so, me and the 3 other white guys were standing at the front of the room. And the black men were at the back of the room. And it's really, to me, is how do you handle attitude? I mean, we can judge behavior, but when I hear talk about diversity and I hear about inclusion, to me, it's about attitude. And I don't know if I have an answer for how we are going to make sure that people have the right attitude to have inclusion be something that is effective.
So George, how do you change people's attitudes on how to be a leader?
Right, you teach them. You're right. You're absolutely right, Rick.
I mean, what's the difference?
Huh? It's got to be something that's learned.
And through repetition and through goals and the like, so it's that's why I say that this is 2 things. One, this is no different than leadership development in the sense of we're all fundamentally in the attitude adjustment business, and there's probably no greater group prepared to help our clients through this process because of the way we approach our business. I see it one and the same. That's why been able to jump into it fairly quickly, because all I'm doing is applying what I already do in a relatively newer context.
And to what you're saying, Rick, this diversity and inclusion chapter or content is really foundational, because then you bring in communication, you bring in emotional intelligence, you bring in all those other pieces that we have in our leadership, and making sure that this is, I think, at the root in order to really build in brand new leadership.
Yeah, I mean, I tell you, I've gotten so much mileage just in the short time we've had this chapter out. I've gotten so much mileage out of it because all I've done is adapt some of the content that's in the chapter to fundamentally the same structure of development that we were doing anyway. So yeah, absolutely. It's very foundational to your point.
So I think we were discussing this before. What biases do we carry? So we're delivering this content, we're helping our clients, we're going out into the business community. How does this impact our own businesses, our own network?
I'll share kind of an interesting experience I have looking at the words you have on the screen. First of all, I kind of want to challenge the group because it's interesting as we're talking about these issues. The only 2 races we've anyone has made reference to in our conversation is white and black. And with me, I interact with a lot of people who are Asian American or Hispanic. I think we also need to be careful about how we frame our conversations. Now, the one word that kind of pops up to me on this screen is cultural bias in terms of race. I've gone through a real learning experience working with members of the Baltimore Shaman Sister City Committee to get a better understanding of how they view the world and how they operate. I've had extensive experience working with the Cameroon Royal Council, and watching the way they interact in the world has caused me to step back and look how I need to do things differently. So culture in that definition, I think, is very important.
I recently took a 1-hour training on diversity and inclusion through another group that I'm involved with. And one of the things that I thought was very well done is they had a list of what does it mean from a legal standpoint, race, gender, gender bias, all kind, you know, the half a dozen things that you measure from a legal standpoint. But they did a very nice job of talking about how issues of diversity and inclusion extend far beyond that. And it's about valuing the person and the idea process and the cultural background and whatever comes with the person. And that may extend far beyond those half a dozen legal things that companies are required to abide by.
Well, Harvard has a implicit bias test, which is, yeah, I don't know. I think it's got about 15 to 20 categories that different tests you can take, building on what Nancy just said. And I just posted on the chat box the link to that. It's very interesting to test. And so it's you can learn a lot about yourself by going through some of those tests.
Absolutely. What assumptions do we make in our personal lives and in business that impact us? So just like, I like how Nancy brought that up. We were just talking about black and white, but when we define diversity, it's so many different things. It's just that. So not making any assumptions and going back over this and making sure that we're checking our own mindset, every single one of us. That's why I started today saying I'm not the pro in this, I'm a student too, because it's more of a journey instead of a destination. And it's not perfect. It's not one and done. And it's constantly evolving. Even when you're looking at access, how do you measure what access someone needs if you don't have the right communication, the right vehicle to ask what that is? And for the individual that needs the access to feel comfortable, to feel in an environment that they can offer that they can feel that it is going to be reflective and accepted. So all of those are, it's very important. I want to just bring about something, if I can, as an activity. I'm going to just stop sharing. In our work group that came about that I thought was really neat. And is he still in the room? So Cleveland's here. Cleveland and I, and as I mentioned, Grant, Bill, Amy, who am I missing, are in a work group.
Tracy.
Who did I, and Tracy, I miss Tracy. And the question came up about left-handed. And I'm missing somebody in our group.
Bill.
Say it again.
Bill.
Bill. So we asked about left-handed, and most of them were left-handed except for Cleveland and I, right? Cleveland. So we were the majority. We were the majority in terms of everything in the world that you can think of. When we were talking about technology, your mouse is automatically placed to the right. So it's an assumption already that right-handedness is the way to go. And if you're left-handed, you're going to have to figure it out. So who's my friend in our group who talked about going into the computer lab?
Oh, that was, oh gosh, I just forgot his name.
Okay.
I think he's in Jersey too.
So he mentioned that he came in college, goes into the computer lab, and he looks around. He says, "Why are the whole setup? The mouse is to the right,
Yeah.
and I need the mouse on the left because I'm left-handed." Goes to play baseball, and you have one mitt that's for the left hand. Wants to play golf, goes into the sporting goods store, and he's like, "Yeah, they were told, yeah, all the way in the corner, you'll find that last set of clubs for left-handed." So there's an assumption made that the majority can have access to whatever they need. You want clubs? Sure, you have a selection of whatever you want because you're right-handed. But if you're left-handed, you get second best, or if there's anything left. So again, just using that as a small example, there are a lot of assumptions that are made for those that actually make the rules, the establishment. I think Lauren mentioned it earlier. How do we talk about systemic racism when we're looking at these organizations, especially if we're working with organizations that have been around? I was in a meeting and someone said, "Yeah, we have our strategic plan. We've been in business. It's a nonprofit for over 105 years." Whoa, what do you have in place if you dust off your strategic plan? So looking at those kinds of organizations as well, what is in place that has always been in place that's not ready for the new? How do we help shape that conversation? Where do we start? Looking at our own assumptions, looking at our own biases, and knowing that if we have them ourselves, like George gave us the example of walking through that activity, then and we think, yeah, I've gone through this. I'm pretty good. I'm aware. I'm alert. But being self-aware is not enough sometimes. So having these difficult conversations help so that we can surface the things that we don't think that we carry. So
That's a really deep one right there. And my wife is an interior designer, and one of the things she really loves is, I don't know, place settings for one thing. And we know how silverware gets laid out in a certain way. It's a standard that's been there forever. And there's, at its height, there's probably 2 forks and 2 spoons, and there's a lot if you do it all right. And if you were to set half of those place settings up in a different way, I know it would drive her crazy because it wouldn't be the standard that she's used to seeing from an aesthetic point of view. So I don't know, there could be a metaphor there that those mouses or mice, whatever the plural is for a computer mouse, on the right side is probably a matter of uniformity and aesthetics in the first place, and not meant to diminish anyone who's left-handed. But I think your point is that there was no even inkling of a thought that someone might be left-handed in that room, and it might feel a little awkward that they have to move it from one side to the other.
And how many of us think about our slides for whether a colorblind person can read it? Yes. I'm a left-handed Scorpio who's partly colorblind. And some of the slides drive me nuts because I have to blink and blink and blink. Yeah.
And I want to suggest that the idea of, in a way, making things more difficult for left-handed people, because I am left-handed, it started long before the mouse on the right side of the computer. This has been going on for centuries. And if you think about yourselves, when you went to school, at least with me, there were no such things as laptops or computers, but all of the desks, that the ones that had the little thing that opened up, they were always on the right. So you had to turn sideways and write this way. Scissors are made for right-handed people. It's like, this has been something that's been going on for a long time. And like Bertha said, they just assume this is the way it's done. It's not new. It's been around for a long time.
Bertha, until you brought this up, I never realized how many people have told me I'm wearing my watch on the wrong hand.
Yeah.
That's a good way to tell. That's a good way to tell a left-handed person from a right-handed person, because left-handed people wear the watch on the right arm. See, and then they think you're really smart because you figured that out.
But, if I may, one more thing about the watch, and I knew this years ago, that there are some watches, Jaeger-LeCoultre, I think, makes one. There's a couple other brands that will make a stem that is on the other side. So a left-handed person can easily wind or set the timing on the watch with their wrist down. Whereas you just showed me your watch before, it's on the upper side of your arm where it's much more difficult to deal with.
I'd take it off.
there are like economic realities here too, that watch companies can go, well, it's, profitability wise, we're going to do this. The left-handed golf club is the same thing. So they've got to think hard about how they're making money in that scenario. So again, it just adds another facet to this complicated matter.
So one of the things that troubles me about these chapters is that, and I've asked myself, and have been in these groups where I've encountered different things and have run into this actually, is how do I deal with someone who is in actuality either an outspoken or a silent racist? And do I have the capability of drawing that person out and really hearing the attitudes? And then how do I get the group to work with it? To me, that's the extreme challenge.
Yeah, it's nuclear.
Grant, in that scenario, are you thinking about the person that brought you in to help, or are you thinking about someone in the organization?
Right. I'm thinking about any group that we get together. You know, I think about the different types we'll run in, different groups we'll run into, and so facilitating the chapter. One group is diverse group. It's got people from different ethnic groups, different races, and how do we have this chapter? And can I have everybody participate in a way we can have real straightforward conversation? And the other is I can have either in that group, or I can have a very homogeneous group, a bunch of older white guys with a dedicated racist in the group. Have I ever run into that in real life situation? Well, I've run into it in management teams, not in the group situation, but certainly with respect to attitudes and in a couple of cases, downright open racism. Now,
Grant, how have you dealt with that?
I've confronted it individually, Arnie.
How has that worked?
Have I changed the person? Probably not. Have I helped get equity in the organization? I think reasonably so. And able to deal with a situation. And of course, all of us who work with people who help in the hiring situation, if you're using assessments, you do this, then we have a way of helping, making sure that people are evaluated fairly and equitably in the hiring process. I think we have a big responsibility here. I feel it deeply.
You don't think there's a self-select that somebody that the head of an organization that's clearly racist and wants to continue in his ways will probably not want to hire you to come into the organization?
No question.
Well, I mean, again, so the point being is we do have limitations in who we're going to work with, that there are biases and people live with the biases, which is the way I wanted to settle as I began to understand the chapter, and I've done a couple of talks on it, is I have focused on, it's what I said when I came into it, is that the more diverse population we draw from, the better our chances of getting the best people.
Yeah.
And so that, and even when we're talking about the golf clubs, I found that to be interesting, that my wife, who wears a 9.5 narrow, which she'll almost never find in a shoe store, because it's too small a population for the shoe store to expend inventory on. And that's why the left-handed golf clubs and all the other stuff. So that my wife finds if she goes online, she can find all the 9.5 narrows she wants, okay?
Yeah.
Because they're dealing, so that becomes a competitive advantage. If you're gonna have 9.5 narrows, how are you gonna market that?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of people that can't get them. I don't mean to focus on something, so that in each case, if we can bring it back to a competitive advantage, we can find ways to begin to move the dialogue, as opposed to I want to move you to do the right thing. It's nice if I can move somebody to do the right thing.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah.
But I've also learned this in the last 6 to 9 months. Almost none of us are free of racism. And so when we don't come to grips with that, and I'm about to have a conversation this evening with somebody who will begin the conversation with, I'm not a racist, which is going to be that there's the red flag. I'm talking to a closet racist, but he doesn't want to own up to it. And so the first thing is identify. So you're really dealing on two things. I mean, this is not somebody that I'm going to have a dialogue about competitive advantage. But when I am talking to a business environment, when I'm going to exclude part of the population from my hiring, that company's going to be at a disadvantage to another company that will not exclude part of the population.
Yeah.
And then we do get into the equity issue that if somebody has not had the opportunity to be as well educated, as a culture, we have to deal with them. Now, most businesses don't want to hear that they have to deal with it because most businesses are for-profit operations. And so there's a difference between dealing with a nonprofit environment or a for-profit environment. So it's a relatively complicated issue that I believe has to always be dealt with situationally.
Oh, sure. Well, the competitiveness and the other element in the scientific community I deal with is the creativity and what diversity does for when you have different people in the group.
Absolutely.
Those conversations are easy to have, and it's an easy sell.
Yes.
With most
And
people.
the example is you ask somebody, what happens to a culture that doesn't take advantage of all the people in the culture?
Yeah, right.
That culture doesn't thrive.
Yeah.
And there are examples of it through the world.
Mm-hmm.
So it goes back to attitudinal and mindset. If the person doesn't want to change, they can stay the way they are, but they won't thrive.
Yes.
And and I'm going to just say for all of us that we want to help those that want the help, those that want to move forward.
Yes.
So that's part of that. Yes. So what's the next challenge for us? So we talked about bringing this to organizations, looking at ourselves, and how do we overcome any of those challenges that come up? So I looked at it in terms of a goal planning sheet. What are the rewards? Back to how Arnie started off in his definition of diversity. What are the rewards and what are the obstacles? And how do we present that to an organization? How do we present that to businesses that are willing, the leaders are willing to say, you know what? Yes, I agree, Arnie, that most of us are very comfortable in our own zones, birds of a feather flock together. So you feel comfortable. You don't see tigers and ducks together. So you really do stay comfortable, but how do you come outside of your comfort zone and express the why? What's the why in it? What's the need? So does anyone want to take a stab? What is it that we talked about the competitive advantage, but what else is there? It's another reason why.
Well, there's a whole lot of reasons why, understanding your market, who are you working with out there and all the different markets you're serving, just the creativity angle, solving problems, different points of view, enlarging your the learning process. So lots of things you gain.
I was thinking helping individuals embrace a broader community as they go through life.
Right.
I think as the person who would take this advice and move forward with it, they're going to have a certain lifting of a weight off of them to begin with, because to carry around something like that, it's different, in its magnitude with different people. But to carry around something like that you don't go and explore and do a little self, awareness of who you are, and like a goal planning sheet, as you mentioned, recognize it, see what the obstacles are, see what's keeping you in that frame of mind, and push past it. That's probably going to be a big relief for just the happiness quotient.
Absolutely. Pushing past it is the difficult, right? Those difficult conversations is There is going to be work that needs to be done. We agree that it's not all and done, and it's a journey, so it's over phases. And there's always going back to the drawing board. You know, where is there another opportunity? Where have we missed the mark? This is an opportunity where we can really help. And someone mentioned it earlier, I'm not sure who it was, but it's culture. I think maybe Nancy or Lauren mentioned it. You know, it's the culture of the organization that is being reshaped. You're moving forward and moving past things that have probably been in place for years and for centuries, where you're excluding, you know, not just on the basis of race, which is the primary reason that we see, but ethnicity and different ideas and experience and ageism, and it goes on and on and on. And if you bring all those different types of thoughts and creativity to the table, you're going to see how you can really thrive and survive in your business. One thing that yes, please share.
Quick question, Bertha, because we're talking about some really great ideas, and we're talking about how we introduce this concept or this idea to a potential client. My question to all of you is, how do we demonstrate success? How do we measure that this process has been successful in terms of diversity and inclusion? What are the factors?
Nancy, we're losing you.
We lost you a little. So I think that the gist of your question is, well, how do we measure it? And that's part of the, wait a minute, how are we going to measure it? Start with what is the reason, what is the why? And I want to ask the group as well, but why are you doing what you're doing? And then going back to measuring it that way. Asking the people that you're saying, okay, well, maybe we need a more diverse board if that's the goal. And then what does diversity look like? We define that. Now we ask the board, you know, how, asking them that are not participating, making sure that they are giving us feedback. And then also the organization, what is it that your mission and vision and values are, and are we meeting our targets? So you can always go back to that. What does the group say? What have been some of your experiences? I'm going to actually call on a few of you that I haven't heard from you. Yeah.
Bertha?
Yeah.
This is Tom. As a student of the whole Simon Sinek and his thought process about start with why, you know, it starts with a belief statement. And then because of this belief, what would be the outcome? So if I were to put this in Simon Sinek ease, if you would, you know, we believe that when we provide an atmosphere that leverages diversity, equity, and inclusion, and not to borrow from Arnie, we create a greater competitive advantage, and we become more innovative in our approach to overcoming solving problems. That's just my quick composition of how do we make this an I believe statement. And then how do we, you know, who else will salute that I believe statement when we run it up the flagpole?
Mm-hmm. All right. What do you think, Bill Killy?
My mouse is uncooperative. It's on the right-hand side and I'm left-handed. But my watch is on the left hand. Anyway, I heard a guy the other day talking about New Year's resolutions. His solution was, or his story was, a friend of his who he really respected, let's agree that we could be that trusted advisor, came to him and said, what are you doing for your New Year's resolutions? The guy said, well, you know, I do it every year. It's kind of a waste of time. He says, you know, humor me. Let's do it. Okay, here's your assignment. I want you to write down everything that will make your 2021 a great year that you will achieve. And then I want you to take from that list the things that you really think you will do. Came back, looked at the first list, and he said, no, I don't want I'm sorry, I don't want the first list. I want the things you must do. So he took the piece of paper and ripped it up and threw it in the trash can, never even looked at it. The guy was a little perplexed. He says, okay, well, why'd I even do it? Well, then show me your other list. And he showed him the other list, and he balled it up, threw it in the trash can. He says, I don't really understand what, I mean, you wasted my whole weekend. I put a lot of time in that. And he says, do you want to see mine? So he reaches in his pocket and he pulls out his little napkin and opens it up. And it had one word in there, and the word was love. So think about that. In the light of what Tom just talked about with Cynic, if we adopt a concept in our hearts of love, and we're going to do the right thing when we're in love for everybody. You don't know what the results are going to be when I love a total stranger. We've seen real life examples of it. If we approach this process from that perspective, I suspect we'll get much better results personally if it's our own goals and our own changes in our own lives. And universally, as we touch others, if we could bring that feeling to be part of kind of a subconscious, if that would be a word, reality, then I think we would have changed people. We would have included, and at that point, diversity, inclusion, and equity become all part of the fabric of that word. And you find it everywhere. You find it in religion. You find it in music. You find it in art. You find it in Simon Sinek. He even says the word. So I think we're maybe a little hesitant to bring it up because it might, I don't know what it might do. Heck, it might change somebody's life. But I don't think it needs to be divorced and excluded from the business community.
Thank you, Bill. Great. I'm going to show a slide as we have our last few minutes. And what opportunity can this deep dive bring to our network? So we talked about our own businesses and what we do for our clients. What can it do for our network? So let's see who I can call on. Probably not going to want to call me back, huh? Patrice, are you available? What's an opportunity that this can, this deep dive can bring to our network?
The first thing it does, it'll give us an opportunity to get out of our comfort zone a little bit. And what that means, that, you know, the more you get to know someone else, the more you can get out of your comfort zone and understand who you're dealing with and how you're dealing with them. I think we have a propensity to try to stay in something that's comfortable. And so I think it gives us the opportunity to expand our horizon past just who we are, to realize that we have way more similarities than we have differences. And until you reach out past where you are and who you are, you don't realize how many other cultures, nationalities, groups have a lot of similarities or things that you can learn from and how they do things, from even irrigating water to cooking. So it just opens up your mind. So the first thing you got to do is open up your mind so you can accept another way of thinking.
Great. Thank you, Patrice.
Mm-hmm.
And Coach Rick Colster, what's this deep dive also? What do you see as an opportunity for our network? There you are. Oh, you're on mute.
You're listening.
There you are.
I'm quietly sitting back because I'm probably, as I'm listening, understanding diversity and inclusion. I'm the prototypical old white guy, and as some of us are, and I struggle with it. I have a diverse family, but from a deep dive, how we bring this is it opened my eyes a little bit. And I had an opportunity to attend a couple of meetings locally here. Our town just had a pretty public, it was in the news, where two police officers pulled over a young man of color, and his dad, he was actually Hispanic. So, but needless to say, his dad filmed him, and they arrested the dad. They maced him. They, pepper sprayed his eyes for standing on the side of the street. And now it's a big uproar in town. And I go, is just never really paying attention because I live in my own little bubble. The challenges that we face that around diversity and inclusion. So what I think we can take to our network is the realization that it's real out there. I live in my little bubble, and we all seem to surround ourselves with people like ourselves, bottom line. So for us, we've got to understand that there are differences out there in all, whether it's age, religion, faith, color, background, etc., and just accept that. And that's I think is most important, is just the understanding. And it's the old, I want to know about you first, and live that St. Francis of Assisi thought process. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. Let me know about you. And then maybe you can know about me. And if we take that as a network, it'll expand us and just continue to make us stronger and a better world overall. And that's what we really need to be, is create a better world, bottom line, because it's kind of crazy right now.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you for picking on me.
Anytime.
I will, I'd like to just share my personal journey a little bit, because I think it's relevant to where we are. I've been involved with Habitat for Humanity for 30 years. I was a president of an affiliate, and I would sit around the table at all us white people trying to provide housing for hardworking people of color and Hispanics. And, I've had friends of color my whole life, and I thought that, I'm not a racist. And my moment was the moment that I fully accepted that institutional racism existed in our society. And as I look at all the faces here, I don't think that we have a problem with that here. But I wonder, as we start to reach out to our networks, what the reality is of people that have really accepted the fact that institutional racism is a real thing, and that your company is not compliant just because you meet your quotas or you have the right amount of minorities on your workforce that reflect your population. That doesn't do it. That's only a little bit. To me, one of the huge opportunities that we have is we can educate people that this is a real thing, and that you have to accept the fact that institutional racism is something that has been with us for a long time. And until we understand it's there and people accept the fact that it's there, we're not going to fix it. It's like anything else. You have to understand it's there. So I think that hearing this conversation and thinking that there's a lot of people like us that are talking about the same thing, that we have
Lost you, George. We lost your connection there.
It's great.
There to make people understand. I'm still faces, so I'm thinking I might have been talking to myself.
Sorry, George, we lost the last half of your comment, but we appreciate what we were able to hear.
You lost me?
Yeah, for a little while there. So with that, it's 3:59. I want to thank you all. We will continue this conversation maybe in smaller groups, one-on-ones, and as we can. And then I'm going to close out with Bill's word. Let's give some more love. Start with self and then pass it on and through our organizations. I want to thank you, Wendy, and thank you all for letting me facilitate and for your participation today. Hope to see you.
Really good. Thank you.
Thank you, Bertha.
Thank you, Bertha. Great job.
Thank you, Bertha.
Thank you.
Pleasure.